Nurse notices something strange about a woman in a coma. When the police arrive, everyone is shocked. Hello, welcome. Like, comment, and share. In the United States, a young nurse named Abigail was newly hired at a hospital in a small county. She worked every day and loved her job, treating everyone with great courtesy and care. Because of this, she was well known among all the patients. However, this also left her more exhausted, as she felt the pain of every person who came through the doors, even though she loved her work. Abigail always empathized with others, which made her more generous with the patients but also caused her to suffer when any of them passed away. But one ordinary day, something happened that would change her life forever. Abigail was on the night shift at the hospital. The shift was calm until ambulances arrived, and paramedics rushed in with a young man and a young woman. Both were severely injured and unconscious. As always, Abigail was ready and did everything she could to help the doctors save their lives. Hours passed, and unfortunately, the young man did not survive. The young woman, however, held on but was in a coma, and the doctors said it could take days or months for her to wake up. Shortly after, the families of the two young people arrived at the hospital, and it was a shock for both families to learn what had happened to them. Abigail then learned the whole story. The two were dating and had come from a party with some friends. The young woman's boyfriend had been drinking a bit, and because of this, he crashed the car at high speed into a pole. Neither was wearing a seatbelt, so they suffered many injuries. The young man did not survive and passed away shortly after arriving at the hospital. The young woman, only 18 years old, named Naomi, hit her head and suffered a traumatic brain injury, which left her in a coma. Naomi's parents wept for their daughter and prayed for her to wake up soon, but only time would tell if and when she would recover. Abigail, along with other nurses, began to care for Naomi. Over time, Abigail developed a special affection for Naomi, as everyone said she looked like Sleeping Beauty, due to her beauty and endless sleep. 90 days passed, and Naomi remained in the same vegetative state, showing no signs of reaction. Naomi's parents visited every day, and even though she could not hear or speak, they talked to her about all the news in their lives. This moved Abigail, as she found the love they had for her beautiful, a love Abigail never experienced, as she was born in an orphanage and was never adopted. Some more days passed, and Naomi was still in her endless sleep. Abigail continued working at the hospital and visited Naomi's room daily to check her condition, change her for, and provide other medical care. Spending so much time by her side made Abigail feel closer to Naomi, even though she showed no reaction. For several days, Abigail noticed that Naomi's mother started visiting her daughter alone. When Abigail asked about her husband, the woman looked sad and said he had passed away a few days earlier. Abigail felt her pain and realized she was going through a very difficult time, dealing with her husband's death and her daughter's condition. Time passed again, and it had been 4 months since the accident. Naomi's mother was there as always, but this time she seemed especially sad. It was Naomi's birthday. Her mother wanted to throw a party and give her many presents, but it was impossible at that moment. Abigail took special care of Naomi that day, although it wasn't much, it was the most she could do for her. However, while changing Naomi's clothes, Abigail noticed something strange about her abdomen. It appeared swollen. She immediately called the doctor on duty that day. He said it could be fluid buildup, gases, or something similar, but he would do an exam to find out. During the exam, the doctor and Abigail were shocked. Naomi was pregnant. The doctor immediately called the police and reported the discovery. Several police cars arrived at the hospital and began investigating. The news of Naomi's pregnancy quickly spread everywhere. The doctors believed it was impossible for her to be pregnant by her deceased boyfriend, considering the severe accident, the surgeries, and her coma. The hospital's surveillance cameras were checked, but nothing unusual was seen near her room. Naomi's mother was deeply confused, wondering how her daughter could be pregnant in such a state and dreading worse possibilities. Despite the doctor's doubts that the child could be her boyfriend's, they performed a DNA test. They compared samples of the mother's DNA with saved samples from the deceased father and the amniotic fluid to determine the baby's father. 2 weeks later, the results came back. The child was indeed her deceased boyfriend's. This pregnancy was considered a miracle by everyone, but due to Naomi's condition, it posed a risk to her life. However, Naomi's mother was against doing anything to the baby, believing the child was innocent. Naomi received even more special care from all the hospital staff. As her belly slowly grew, Abigail wondered about the future of this child, born from an unconscious mother and a recently deceased father. Sometimes, Abigail looked at Naomi and wondered what she would think of all this. Her face seemed peaceful. But to Abigail's astonishment, Naomi opened her eyes at that moment and looked into the void for a few seconds before closing them again. The doctors checked on the young woman, but she showed no further reaction that day. However, the next day, her mother screamed for help. Naomi was awake. She was trying to say something but couldn't. She was very weak from being unconscious for so long. It was a miracle. The doctors advised not to mention her boyfriend or her father for now, but the pregnancy couldn't be hidden. Naomi looked at her belly and cried, though she still couldn't speak. Her mother consoled her, saying everything would be okay. Slowly, Naomi began to move and speak. While still recovering, her mother told her that her boyfriend couldn't be there at the moment and that her father was away on a business trip. Naomi found it strange but accepted it, still a bit confused. However, her belly revealed she had been unconscious for a while. She began to suspect something was wrong with her father and boyfriend not appearing. This made her anxious, so they had to tell her the truth. Naomi burst into tears upon learning that her father had passed away, but she showed almost no reaction to the news that her boyfriend didn't survive the accident. The pain she felt from losing her father was immense. Though hoarse, she explained what had happened with her boyfriend. They had argued, and she had broken up with him, but he wouldn't accept it. In the car, they continued to fight, and amid the confusion and alcohol, he crashed the car. Abigail overheard everything from outside the room. Naomi's crying made her cry too. She wished she could do something to ease the young woman's pain but couldn't do anything. That night, Abigail talked with Naomi. For her, it was a special moment, feeling like a friend, even though Naomi was seeing her for the first time. It was a good conversation, but Naomi's sadness was evident. She said she wanted to leave soon, but the baby was about to be born, and she wouldn't keep it. She expressed anger towards the baby, saying that if she had woken up sooner, she would have forcibly removed it herself. This shocked Abigail, but she tried to understand Naomi's pain. A few weeks later, the baby was born. Naomi didn't want to hold it or even know its gender. Abigail watched everything but couldn't blame the young woman, who might have been experiencing post-traumatic or postpartum stress. Much had happened to her. Naomi was finally discharged with her baby, but it was given up for adoption, as Naomi never wanted to see it again. 20 years passed. Naomi was now a mature woman, married, with 2 young children. She was successful but tried to forget the past. Her husband knew what had happened to her years ago and did everything to make her happy. She needed therapy for years. Her mother passed away a few years after she woke up, adding to her sadness at the time, but she wanted to move forward for her husband and children. Naomi was happy, but sometimes the weight of the past came back to her memories, and no amount of therapy could completely erase it. She tried to forget the child she had given up for adoption but often found herself wondering how they were. However, whenever she thought about the child, she felt a mix of sadness and anger, remembering the day of the accident. This made her try to forget the past and focus on the present. Naomi owned a flower shop, cultivating roses and plants, which started as a hobby and became her main job. She felt calmer surrounded by nature's beauty, which brought her peace. She loved welcoming couples who wanted to buy beautiful bouquets of roses for romantic surprises. One couple began frequenting her shop, spending many minutes admiring the flowers. Naomi looked at them and remembered when she was young with her late boyfriend. The young woman picked up a cactus and said she would take it. Naomi found it interesting, as few people buy cacti, but the young woman admired them for their resilience, seeing them as a symbol of strength. The only sad part was that to adapt to difficulties, cacti develop thorns that prevent others from touching them. Naomi was impressed by the young woman's wisdom. She handed her the cactus, and the couple left. Days later, the couple returned. Naomi greeted them, and the young man said they were buying a rose for a dearly beloved person who had passed away. Naomi noticed their sadness, especially in the young man. She then gave them one of the most beautiful roses she had and didn't charge them. They were surprised and thanked her a lot. That couple reminded her of her past, and coupled with the pain of losing someone close, it made her remember even more. Days passed, and the past weighed increasingly on her mind. She thought a lot and then made a decision. She would look for the child she gave up. She wanted to know at least if they were well. Perhaps then she could finally forget everything that had happened. Naomi talked to her husband and gently explained everything to their young children, who were too young to understand it all. Her husband supported her decision, and she began searching for her past. Naomi started with the orphanage where her child had been left. She was nervous, knowing she wouldn't find any children there, as 20 years had passed. However, just after entering the orphanage, someone called her name. It was Abigail. Naomi was confused, not remembering her. Abigail then explained everything that had happened while Naomi was in a coma. Naomi listened attentively, but discussing the past still made her anxious. She asked what Abigail was doing there. Abigail was honest. She said Naomi's case had profoundly affected her, as she had witnessed every moment from the accident's arrival to Naomi's discharge and the baby being given up. Abigail often visited the orphanage to see how the child was doing. During these visits, she interacted with the other children and, knowing what it's like to live in an orphanage, grew attached to all of them. She visited more frequently until an opportunity to work in the infirmary arose. She didn't hesitate to apply. From that day, she found her purpose in life, loving all the children and continuing to work there. Naomi asked about her child, wanting to see them because she felt something missing in her life, a weight she didn't understand. Abigail looked at her for a moment and said, "I stayed by your child's side from the moment they arrived until they left. Your baby was never adopted and left when they turned 18. I still have contact with your child, but I need to inform them that you're looking for contact, so I can't tell you more about their whereabouts." Naomi understood and gave her flower shop's address. As she left, Naomi noticed some cacti at the entrance, placed high to keep the children from touching them. The pots bore the symbol of her flower shop. She asked Abigail why there were cacti there. Abigail said she liked cacti because they symbolize strength. The sad part is that to adapt to difficulties, they develop thorns to prevent others from touching them. But she kept them high to avoid hurting the children. At that moment, Naomi's heart pounded. She asked who brought the cacti. Abigail said it was one of the girls who lived at the orphanage. Naomi left crying without saying anything to Abigail. She finally realized who her child was, the young woman who often visited her flower shop with a young man. She had said the same words about cacti as Abigail, and she had lived in the orphanage too. Naomi felt a mix of indescribable emotions. She barely slept that night. The next day, while at the flower shop, the same young woman from that day entered the store. Naomi was emotional and immediately asked for forgiveness. But the young woman quickly said it wasn't her. Naomi was surprised and listened. She introduced herself as Martha. Martha explained that she was born in the orphanage but was adopted at 14. However, she always stayed in touch with Dominic, as they grew up together in the orphanage and he was her best friend. Dominic was Naomi's son. She explained that with Abigail's help, they found out where Naomi was, but Dominic never had the courage to speak to his mother, knowing what had happened and believing she wouldn't want to see him. So he thought she would never want to talk to him, but he still asked Martha for help, pretending to be a couple so he could visit the flower shop and see his mother without suspicion. However, a childhood friend had recently passed away, deeply affecting him. Abigail contacted him, but Dominic was very sad and continued to believe Naomi wouldn't want to meet him. So Martha went to Naomi to give her a chance to talk to him. Martha and Naomi immediately went to Dominic's house. It was a simple place, but Naomi noticed the many roses at the entrance, which he had bought from her. She rang the doorbell. Dominic opened the door, and upon seeing her, he accidentally said the word, "Mother." Naomi immediately hugged him, and he hugged her back. In a simple embrace, she felt all the weight lifting, all the past being erased. She could never have imagined feeling like this. Both cried with emotion. Mother and son talked for hours. She apologized for leaving him at the orphanage, but Dominic said it wasn't her fault. That everything she went through must have been horrible and that she did her best for him at that time. Dominic also mentioned that Abigail always treated him well and protected him. She was always there for him. This made Naomi happy, knowing that someone cared for her son when she couldn't. Dominic met Naomi's husband and her siblings. He also became part of his mother's life. Naomi knew that the past might not be erased, but she began to love her son. She wished she could go back in time and change her decision, but time does not go back. So from that day on, she would do everything to be as present a mother as possible.